He loved her so much that he gave her brain cancer.
Well, hey, what's happening, guys? I am Chad, and this is...
Maple.
And Maple just got to watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 for the first time. So, we're going to talk about it. What'd you think about it, Maple?
I love this movie. I have a little list that I'm doing with Patreon. I ranked it, but I think it's probably one of my top ones right now.
Oh, okay. Dope. How do you feel about the Guardians in general?
I like the dynamic, and I think this movie really hit on the point as to why I like the dynamic of the Guardians, and it's because they kind of cultivate this sense of family with a bunch of different personalities, even though none of them really have to be around each other, but they continue to, and they built their own little family, so I enjoy it.
So let's go ahead and get into the movie.
All right.
The movie starts off.
Yes.
They're fighting a big worm monster thing.
Worm squiddy.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was.
But whatever it is, they've been hired by Aisha, or the Sovereign, from that race of super overachievers.
Gold lady.
Yeah, Gold Lady. You know, it's kind of a MacGuffin. She wants them to protect her batteries from the monster thing, but of course Rocket decides to steal some batteries.
Right.
Also, the exchange was for Nebula, who was also trying to steal the batteries.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a convenient way for us to introduce Nebula back into the story, because if you remember from Guardians 1, she just kind of gets away.
Yeah, because she just kind of flies off, and I'm like, where's she going?
You think you're going to see her again, possibly, but then that's the last time she's gone.
I don't know. The introduction was kind of weak for her coming back in. It's kind of like... Okay, you just got caught. Yeah, you just got caught stealing batteries. There was no real talk about what her larger intention was of trying to steal those batteries.
If they had tied it in...
like to her trying to get Gamora or
get him back to like Thanos, like he needed this power for something or whatever. Yeah, it really does kind of just feel like a MacGuffin. Is Nebula just kind of a pirate on her off time? Just out there stealing stuff? Yeah, like
such a weird, soft... re-entry of her character, because it's like with somebody like Bucky, right?
Yeah.
It's like Bucky didn't appear to be like he would have been a big issue, but then it's like the way they introduced him back in to the storyline makes it a big issue.
The Winter Soldier could have just been like some guy robbing a bank and they caught him. You know, that would have felt like the Nebula thing, where it's like, and then wait a second, I think I know that guy. You know, they could have done that, and that would have been a lot worse than
like just a real soft
making a big deal. But I think part of why that happened is because it's kind of not the Nebula movie; it's more the Ego movie.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Do you did you recognize Ego at all?
No.
Ego.
Oh, freaking Christ for Helicopter Cowboy!
Yes.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was looking at him, he does look familiar. So then they crash into Garth. What is it called? It's like Earth with a G and an extra letter. Yeah. Something else. The ship is like wrecked, destroyed. So they're trying to figure what to do there. He ends up coming down with them.
And he introduces himself.
Yeah.
Invites them back to like his kind of, home
planet
thing, which you later realize is basically just like his brain.
And they leave Rocket, Nebula, and Groot.
Right.
And while Groot's repairing the ship.
What's that thing she's trying to eat and they're not ripe yet?
Oh, the little... I don't even know.
Turnip or
it's just
something
like a little
like that?
turnip-looking thing. Yeah.
That's my favorite joke in the movie. Is like she tries to eat the thing, it's not ripe. She tries a second time. Someone else is like, hey, no, they're not ripe. And then finally she like betrays them, and then she bites into the thing. And she spits it out and she's like, it's not ripe.
And I'm like, literally, because Drax... It's when Drax... they're getting their asses kicked by the Sovereign.
Right.
And he... tethers himself to the back of the ship and flies out to get that last little pilot ship, and he kicks it away from her. He's like, it's not ripe, and then just jumps out into space.
It wasn't right.
Yeah, I know.
But backtracking a little bit, speaking of the Sovereign, that's what happens is basically the Sovereign hires Yondu to go and capture Peter. So that's a nice... convenient way to tie back in Yondu back into the story. At the same time, we find out more about Ravager culture.
Right.
Ravagers aren't just his group. It's like a type of mercenary. And because he was dealing in child trafficking.
They are like, we have a specific set of rules and they don't deal kids is what he ended up saying. And he's like, we'll never, forgive you for that. Like, you may dress like us, but you'll never be one of us. So
you're not a Mandalorian. You took your helmet off. Did you recognize the Italian stallion?
I feel like I should have.
Big deal. He's Rocky. He's Rambo.
Cool. I've never seen Rocky. Yep. I've never seen Rambo.
Yeah, he's the man.
But and they have that conversation. They exchange those words, and then Gold Lady shows up again and gives him that deal. And so it's them then kind of coming around Rocket, Gamora, and Groot and the ship.
We also established that Taserface, like his number, I don't know, 3-ish or whatever.
Yeah, because he's upset because he feels like Yondu always has a soft spot for Quill, which it is true. But I just figured he just, they're
homies.
Homies, yeah. Or like since he didn't deliver him when he was little and he basically like raised this kid within this group of people, but it was like he was mainly taking care. Yeah, that
he's
is
part of the crew, you gotta look after your guys.
Yeah, so then Gamora shoots his mohawk off, his fin.
Right.
And then they just start murdering each other, which is wild, and just sending each other into space, the ones that don't really seem to agree with
the loyalists basically get murdered.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's just Rocket and Yondu locked up together. But they have one homie who... Kraglin.
Which is James Gunn's brother.
And his character is super... Like, he's just kind of cute and funny. Like, quirky, a little quiet, but...
Kind of simple, but he's down.
He's excited. Yeah. Like, he's happy to be there.
Yeah, he's happy to be there, and he's going to give it his best.
His best. So then he basically helps Gamora get... She said she wanted a ship, and then she goes on...
I think you mean Nebula.
Yeah, Nebula. Yeah. He helps Nebula get the... Have I been saying Gamora this whole time? Yeah, Nebula. He helps Nebula get the ship, and she's like, I'm going to go kill my sister, and then I'm going to kill my dad. And doing all this stuff, like, saying all this crazy stuff, and he's literally just like... Okay, cool. All right, yeah, sounds good. And he's like, anyway, bye. It's just his character's so funny. He was used as good comedic relief, I think. Not that you need much more in this movie, but
yeah, it's hard to do a comedic relief character in something that's already a comedy because sometimes they have to become a Looney Tune.
Yeah.
But I think it's handled very well in these movies. Taserface survives and tattles to the Sovereign.
Yeah, for a moment he survives, and then she laughs at him for picking the name Taserface. After Rocket humiliated him in front of everyone about picking the name Taserface.
It's a rough name.
Yeah.
It's not a great look.
Taserface.
It's pretty rough.
And he's like, yeah, so that aside, they end up, getting to the planet, Ego, and he's walking them through his life journey and... what he is and where.
What did you think of the art direction for how they did that?
I think it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the figurines in more eggs.
Yeah. Is really into the whole like...
Man has a thing for eggs.
Well, it's eggs and seeds. It's like I planted the seeds in all these different, planets and women. And that's all in eggs. That's all very like, it's got this very kind of a tree of life kind of feel going on. But as far as the the CG like porcelain marionettes kind of acting out the story, like it could have been anything. And it's kind of fun that it's that. I think just creative. I think in general these movies lack a little bit in the creativity department when it comes to the writing. So at least in their presentation. The
visuals are really good.
And I think these movies over some other ones.
Yes, I agree. I think that's why I kind of like this movie a lot was because of because it's hard because Captain America Civil War, in terms of the plot and how it was just written and the acting, I really, really like that movie. But this is just fun.
And so you're kind of like, yeah, cool, but I've seen that. I've never seen this before.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Yeah.
Doctor Strange, you probably never seen that before, So it's like when they push the limits on the creativity is where I tend to give them some bonus points. So so what does he basically say happened in his journey?
He basically says on his journey to find life, he did find life because he felt that he was alone in the universe, so he created this structure for himself. Helicopter cowboy.
And importantly, he fell in love.
And then he fell in love with Peter Quill's mom.
And he was
his water lily.
He was true to her. And she was very important to him.
He visited her 3 times on Earth, and if he had visited one more time,
he wouldn't be able to leave again, right?
He wouldn't have had this vision of eternity and been able to see it through or whatever. So he loved her so much that he gave her brain cancer.
Well, that's skipping way ahead.
Yeah, but he did. He loved her so much. Right. It is skipping ahead, but it's like, oh, you loved her so much. But
exactly. No, he's obviously full of shit. He doesn't understand human feelings of like actual love and stuff like that.
But he basically paints this beautiful, magical imagery.
Right, exactly.
With visuals.
Everything you'd want to hear.
Yeah, and the planet itself is just super pretty.
And his ability to like morph with the local fauna to make people think that, you know, he fits in and stuff like that. So that also is going to like, how human can you be if you can equally schmooze with a million different planets, you know? They also pay off, I think, here too. One thing that kind of lets you know, this is probably not, again, like I said, it's very visually creative, but I remember having issues with the movie when I first saw it. I saw on some of the writing stuff. Like another thing that kind of irked me was they put such a big hat on it when Peter in the beginning is talking about, I think, like not having a dad around and like, oh, no one ever played catch with me kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so then when he goes and kind of unlocks Peter's power, he's like, oh, look, it makes a little ball. And then they kind of play some catch. And it was like, oh, Jesus Christ.
But then it's so funny because later on he's like, I don't know, I made a ball. I thought with everything that I had and it's all I could think of.
Yeah. Well, he says too, like, I'm going to make weird stuff.
I know.
That's probably one of the better jokes as well.
Yeah, so then later we see Pac-Man when they're in, like, the most intense portion of the fight scene.
Which is also not very creative or weird. It's just, he just pulled from another thing he knows.
Yeah, right? I'm like, okay.
So hard cut to... Nebula finds Gamora.
Yeah, because Gamora is trying to get a hold of Rocket because she has this feeling this whole time that something is not right or not lining up. She is just kind of... I feel like she's a very intuitive character.
She is.
She leads very much by intuition. If there's anyone I feel that has had more time to just process her own... I guess it would just be trauma or like her life or the things that she's been through. I think she does a good job of handling that. And how she interacts with the external world. I think she is closed off, obviously, but she's not reckless.
Well, she's closed off emotionally, but she's been a warrior her whole life, ever since she was a little girl. And she's been working for Thanos, who's been on like a, conquering rampage forever. And so...
Same as every other freaking person in the universe.
On that ship, yeah, right. So then what happens is,
Not even them, it's just everyone in the MCU universe. They're like, I'm just like, y'all need to just take a seat.
If everyone just took some shrooms.
Just take a seat.
Yeah, have some nice tea. You guys would all be nice and chill. It'd be fun.
Just relax.
Then I think a big thing here, though, is that really what this conflict with Nebula and Gamora is for is to kind of pay off, I think, some of the feelings. How did you feel about their relationship in the first movie?
The whole time, it just feels like they're just pinned against each other. One has to be better than the other, but Gamora's always been the favorite.
So do you think the movie accomplished?
But I think now with this, it's noticing that Gamora had more of a sense to survive, and Nebula, I believe her when she said that she truly just wanted a sister.
Right. That's why I think this scene, all this setup in this movie of the conflict between the two of them, and so that they can finally get to that head and get to that emotional through line of that I think is set up in the first movie. And that's kind of why I asked about it, was like, I think that a lot of people had this feeling of like, gosh, I wish these two could just get on the same team, because like obviously they both hate Thanos. So the hate for each other is so unwarranted. It also feels like you said, Gamora is emotionally cut off. I think she also is with Nebula. And I think that if she showed a little bit more warmth to Nebula, a lot of this could have been avoided, even earlier than it was. Because the feud between them, I kind of don't ever buy. It really feels one-sided. It seems like Nebula is obsessed with Gamora, and Gamora doesn't really think about Nebula. I'm sure on a certain kind of like, she's my sister, I love her kind of sense she does. But she's not constantly going like, I need to do this so I can prove that I'm better than Nebula, like but she never has that. But I
don't think that I think looking at it from a standpoint of like trauma and like people who go into survival mode, like her entire Gamora, all she does is work from a space of survival mode. That's her whole life, is survival. So it's like technically Nebula does have one thing that Gamora doesn't, which is I think a little bit more of, she probably had a softer heart or a more open heart.
Yeah.
And so each time that she was picked and prodded at or made to be perfect and fixed, it pulled at that a little bit more. So now where she's coming from is a place of anger and fear and not understanding why she couldn't have just been accepted. Whereas Gamora didn't really go through that, so she's just been operating in a survival mode. Right, so it's not that she would have ever not have seen her sister in that light. It's just that she needs to realize that, like, they both need to realize, like, it's neither of their fault, which I think is what they get to.
It's Thanos' fault.
It's going to be Thanos' fault.
And that's another thing.
And that they both were doing what they needed to do in order to survive.
Their situation has also been very objectively unfair. Like, Thanos has objectively treated Nebula much worse than Gamora. So it's kind of impossible for them to have similar worldviews about everything, because it's like Gamora has like a tiny little bit of, you know, mechanical stuff here and there, but like, you know, friggin' Nebula's basically an 80% robot at this point.
Yeah, they just handle their fear different, I think, so.
Well, yeah, but I just mean, like, there also has been a life difference. They didn't grow up exactly the same.
Well,
one of them was, like, just getting beat to hell by Thanos all the time, and Gamora's, like, relatively,
Right, but that's what I'm saying. But their root of fear was the same. They just handle it differently. So they just ended up with different conditions within the same trauma. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have 5.
You have 5 siblings, yeah. So, and I don't know. It just reminds me of, like, the dynamic between my siblings and I, where we eventually had to come back around and realize that, like, it was never our individual connections as to why we didn't like each other. Like, it was the trauma that was rooted from our parents, and that it was the same trauma, but it just reflected different across all of us. So I guess that's what I'm trying to...
No, that's fair. I'm just also I'm adding to that it's not also exactly the same trauma, though, because, like, he was torturing Nebula substantially more than Gamora.
But Gamora...
So it makes sense to me that the two of them would behave differently as well.
Right, but Gamora would know that. But that's what I'm saying. Like, Gamora knew that was happening to her sister, so her need for survival goes up at that point.
But knowing it's happening and it happening to you are not the same thing either, though.
Right, but there's still, like, shared trauma, so she could still recognize, okay, now if I don't win next time, then that's what could happen to me.
That's true, but I would still say
so then she's going to fight harder, and then at this point it's going to be her sister also trying to fight harder to prove a point, but never really probably wanting that to be her thing, because she just wanted a sister. But then that's what I'm saying. It's still the same. It's still the same traumas, just reflected different. Like, the root of the trauma is the same. I'm not saying the trauma itself is the same.
Yeah, but yeah. Like, that's what I'm agreeing that the tendencies they both have are different to kickstart. But I don't want to brush over the reality of the difference between, like, vicariously experiencing someone else's trauma and having the actual trauma happen to you.
Right.
And
I get that.
It makes me much more sympathetic to Nebula that she was physically being assaulted constantly by Thanos, and Gamora wasn't. And so it's like, I understand it was a bad situation for Gamora, and she would have been concerned and vicariously have experienced that through Nebula, but that still is not the same as it actually happening to you.
Right.
This isn't theory in Nebula's mind. It's been happening to her.
I know, but then that's why I'm saying, like, I'm not saying, but I'm saying the root is them realizing that it's Thanos, not... You know, like, it's the hand that
the route that they miss, the false identity they've been living in, has been not understanding that's Thanos. And I think, again, I think that's something Gamora picked up on earlier anyway, though. I still think that's why I said I feel like the relationship of the competition part has been kind of one-sided.
Yeah.
Partly because it seems like they don't have much of an explanation for why Gamora is better than Nebula, so you kind of have to assume it's kind of a point of privilege. Like, she just was. So she maybe doesn't, have a mathematical explanation of, like, did she train harder or something? Like, maybe she was just more naturally adept. So it seems like because it was always kind of a one-sided situation and she was the favorite, she never came across to me like she had a chip on her shoulder, like she had something to prove about being better than Nebula. But that seems to be all Nebula thinks about.
But that's why I'm saying I think it's them coming together and realizing that how Gamora falls into her survival mode is different than how Nebula does.
But it's also like the stakes have been different. Gamora hasn't had to prove she's better than Nebula because she's just been better than Nebula the whole time.
Yes, but they've been fighting each other. Like, if they've been had to battle, like, been set to train to fight each other since they were at a young age, is what they explained in the movie. And every time, like, Gamora didn't show mercy, and then knows that her sister would then be, like, get her arm ripped off or her eye plucked out, right? It's like, it's one or the other. Like, if it's not happening to Gamora, it's going to be happening to her sister. And if I was Gamora, I would be thinking, well, if I don't win, right? If I have to do this and I don't win, then that's just going to happen to me. And so it's that fear. So I just think, like, she leaned into her survival mode more in order and did anything she could, obviously, to win. And, like, that's not great because how she should have been looking at it is, you know, that's her sister.
Well, and I'm not saying she should have pulled her punches. When I say that she could have had more warmth, I don't mean by, like, pulling her punches on that kind of stuff. I feel like she also is a very just kind of, I mean, they both are. They're very, like, cold, emotionally, like, aloof, you know, antagonistic kind of people. And if they had, you know, even though they had to fight and stuff, if Gamora and Nebula could have connected on a more spiritual level earlier on, I feel like what happens in that scene could have happened years ago, you know. It's a very simple conversation that they kind of have. But it seems like just, you know, the aloofness between the two of them is kind of what kept, you know, getting through it. Because I honestly don't really believe Nebula has ever in the movies really been out to kill Gamora. It seems like she's always kind of wanted to break through into that more kind of, you know, I just wanted a sister thing. I just kind of need a, hey, I love you, I'm sorry kind of thing. And as soon as she gets that, she's kind of on the team all of a sudden. And so I think it sucks that it took all the way up until this time before those two get that kind of catharsis. And it's something I feel like they set up in the first movie. Because I remember in the first movie being like, God, I wish these two would just get together. You know, it's like, obviously it seems like that's kind of something they'll probably lead to.
Yeah.
She seemed like one of the more kind of salvageable characters. And once they establish that Gamora immediately is betraying Thanos, and then later on when Nebula finds out that Ronan wants to betray Thanos, it seems like, okay, like these two have a common thing going on.
Right. I mean, they both hate their dad. Yeah. It's just them needing to mend. I don't know. I agree with the resentment that was held between the two of them. I think it makes sense. So
that leads
I buy into it, I guess. I don't know. So
yeah, I don't see where we're disagreeing on.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing with you.
I feel like we agree.
Yeah.
Okay. So that leads us into Ego now kind of spilling the beans about what was really going on and how we kind of covered it. But, you know, he was seeding a bunch of planets. And his thing is that he's kind of trying to become like this like all supreme being of the entire universe, right?
Yeah, because he ultimately just wants to create eternity. So he's been planting these pieces of himself all over the planet. And then he realized he needs
another celestial
like entity of him in order to hold enough power to make that happen.
So he just made a bunch of kids hoping that he could get another one.
Yes, which is then where that makes sense why Yondu was bringing. And then once Yondu figured out what was actually happening, that's why Peter Quill was never delivered.
Caglan, I think, or whatever his name is the one in the end of the first movie who's like, oh, good thing we didn't accidentally, you know, we messed up and we didn't bring him to his dad. And that kind of seems very hand-wavy, like, oh, it was just a coincidence, like Peter just happens to be the kid. But no, it was all planned. Like, that was part of the deal. Yondu has basically been this harbinger of death for all these poor kids who all get tested and failed and then basically just wiped out in mass. And he finally felt bad for one of them. So, yeah, that connection was kind of immediate.
Yeah, because they find that little graveyard, basically, of bones when Gamora and Nebula are fighting. And that's when she was like, I knew something wasn't right.
Yeah, something fell off.
Yeah, something didn't
We also haven't brought up Mantis at all up to this point.
Mantis.
I think it's partly because she's not super plot important up to this point.
No,
Mantis,
definitely not.
I'm going to be honest, dude. She feels like she's straight up there to be almost like another character who can be on the same level as Drax. And they wanted to be like, hey, what, you know, there's kind of a Gamora and Quill get to play off of each other. Groot and Rocket are already like an established relationship. And they have kind of a Timon and Pumbaa vibe. And so Drax kind of feels like this guy like floating in the wind. So it really, to me, kind of felt like they're like, hey, it would be fun if we had another character who was kind of on his level.
Yeah.
So both of them seem a little bit bonked in the head, you know, but she's got this kind of empath ability. So they're kind of like equal. Antennas, yeah, so they're like equal opposites. Like he's a guy who has no ability to understand metaphor, although I would argue they break that rule a lot. He uses metaphors, but whatever. But he does understand metaphor, so he has this kind of almost empathy block between him and people where it's like he can't relate on a certain level. And then she kind of has this thing where she seems very neurodivergent, but has this ability around hyper empathy to be able to like tap into your emotions and stuff. So she can't like mind control you, but she can kind of like emotion control you and mood control you. Yeah, she can
like, you know, create emotions within people.
Yeah, right.
And she's basically like, oh, like I help, you know, him sleep if he needs to sleep or whatever he wants. So that comes in handy later.
And then to keep it strictly platonic, they keep playing with the thing that Drax finds her hideous.
Yeah.
Although obviously the actress who plays her is like a supermodel, you know, that's kind of their whole joke is, you know, oh, he keeps calling her ugly because he doesn't understand. Again, like they both come across like neurodivergent type people who don't understand manners. You know, catching back up to where we are, probably the best scene in the movie, in my opinion. Ego finally explains, you know, what happened with the mom, and then he's like, oh, and it broke my heart when I had to put that tumor in her brain. So it's not just that like, oh, you got so unlucky and this is so sad, like your dad stepped out on you and your mom died. It's like he's the one who killed her. All of the baggage and bad feelings that Quill had to hold all of this time is now literally personified. And it's that feeling of like, this is Batman's ordeal, right? Batman talks about it with Ra's al Ghul where he's like, don't you want to get vengeance? And he's like, I can't. The guy who, you know, killed my parents got killed by someone else. I can't get it. So it's like this, what do I do with this? Like, there's nothing to like aim it at. It's like, there's no one to blame. It's just this freak thing that happens. So like, what do you do with all these feelings? And then to find out in an instant that like, oh no, all of that can be aimed at somebody. And the way that they shoot the Zolly, it's a zoom in and a dolly out on his face when his eyes turn back to normal and he's like, what? It's like you just I don't know, that just sold me. I felt him like waking up.
Well, because he crushes the Walkman. Yeah. And
yeah, that was powerful.
With the Volume 2, you know, mixtape. That's the last thing that he had, and it took him forever to open it.
And I love that they don't get into a long-ass diatribe about it. He just starts shooting. Yeah. Like, right away. Like, I thought that was really cool. And then Ego's kind of true nature comes out. Again, his, like, super sociopathy comes out where he's like, okay, fine, I guess I'll just make you a battery, and maybe after a few thousand years, you know, you'll change your mind or whatever.
So he, like, stabs him through the chest with, like, an energy tentacle. I don't know what you'd call that thing. But then we start seeing stuff, all those things that he planted on the other planets. Well, they just goes back to where they were running behind the Dairy Queen and whatever that gelatinous blob that's going to be taking over everything. Stuff. Yeah.
I also think in one of those shots, his grandpa shows up from the first movie, who's the one who was like with him at the hospital. But it's quick. This is around the time where Mantis starts to feel guilty because what she knows.
Sits with Drax.
So she kind of pulls a Yondu as well. Like all of his people are starting to kind of like betray him because they're realizing that he's really douchey.
Well, and I think her kind of not ever having had actual interaction, because she talks about how she's never really had normal human normal personal interaction with anyone. Right. And so sitting and, you know, testing her abilities on a group of people. And then sitting with Drax, who probably has, which it's sad because Drax really truly does have a horrible backstory.
Oh, yeah.
But they just don't play it. I mean, it obviously doesn't get really played into as much just because of the type of character that he is.
And the type of movie.
More of a comedic relief and the type of movie that it is, that when she sits down with him, that's kind of the first time that you kind of get hit with that feeling where you're like, oh yeah, like he's had a daughter and like had experiences with his kid, and he's like, oh, these little these tide pools remind, like the little ponds remind him of when he went and did this with his daughter, and she puts his hand on him and she just starts sobbing. And he's, you know, just sitting there kind of like stonewalled, just reminiscing. But obviously then you see through her what he's actually feeling, that we'd never really get from him outwardly.
100% agree, yeah.
And that's where she's like, I have to tell you something.
These are all the things I think are handled better in this movie. Like the stuff between Gamora and Nebula, I think is handled so kind of powerfully in that scene. I mean, especially like the one line delivery of just like, you know, I just wanted a sister. It's like you learn everything you kind of need to know emotionally about what's going on with them. With that powerful line delivery, them going there with Ego, explaining like gave her the cancer that killed her, and then him snapping out of it. And that scene is very powerful. That scene there is very powerful. Yeah. So it's kind of like the first movie, I think a lot of those things tried to get tackled, but they came across a little bit hammy. The part where Rocket starts to talk about how, you know, he gets in the bar fight and they're like, what's your problem? And he's like, I didn't ask to get, modified and messed with over and over and over again. It's like, I hear the sentiment, but it wasn't super duper the way it was placed and the way it was handled wasn't like super knocking it out of the park for me on that scene. Right. And I remember also feeling like it kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. It's like, oh, we haven't really earned our way up into this point, you know? And then Drax talks about the stuff and he keeps complaining about what happened or whatever. But again, like, I don't think any of them are really met the emotional climaxes that this movie kind of did. Yeah. So if there's one thing that this movie, I think, really figured out that the first one was testing and trying to figure out was how to make those emotional points hit harder.
Yeah. She just finally cracks and is like, I need to tell you what's going on. Like, he has everything exactly where he wants it right now, and this is really bad. And Drax still is like dry heaving about, he's like, please don't make a move on me. And she's like, no, I'm not. She's like, I'm trying to help you and save you. So then this is where we kind of get to that Marvel phase of the movie. Yeah, where we're like, okay, here we go. Like, we're going to have to start fighting and shooting guns.
Half an hour of a big old fight that's going to come. And again, if you're going to look at that, it's nice when they're creative and kind of fun. Mm-hmm. You know, when you do the Pac-Man thing and stuff like that, you know how it works. There's also a ticking bomb element, literally.
And we already saw that Baby Groot is, just Groot in general. Any Groot.
Yes.
Is not
working with a full stack of cards.
Yeah, he just like he gets it, but he just doesn't.
And I think the baby version is even more.
Yeah, and there's just a lot going on, and then you forget that the freaking coordinates were sent by
the Sovereign
Taserface. Honestly, like, I don't know if it helped or if it didn't help, but there was just so much going on at that point that because they just wanted the batteries back, but then they make the little bomb for.
If the Sovereign people kind of weren't involved in the plot, except for maybe just the opener, it probably wouldn't have removed too much from it, you know?
Yeah, but it was just another obstacle.
Right, exactly, that's the thing. Yeah. It's always about, like, I got 8 things to do and I only have time for 3. Yeah. You know, how do I improvise?
Whole other obstacle in there.
Which is a good way to kind of create tension.
This is where you kind of also realize, like, Mantis is kind of a badass. Like, her powers are actually super freaking cool because... They, like, if she wasn't able to do that, she was like, he's too powerful. Like, I can only go to sleep when he wants me to have him go to sleep. And come to find out, she's literally, like, they're about to get steamrolled. And she touches one of, like, it looks like a nerve, basically. Like,
yeah, right. They all look like neurons in a brain.
Yeah, and she's like, sleep. And, like, he literally just shuts the whole thing down. And she just stays there. And she's like, I don't know how long I can hold him. But it was long enough.
It's that hero moment of the character who thinks they have some inner power, and then in the third act they realize that you were much more powerful than you ever thought. You just had to believe.
And this is where it's like, now we're really like, we've just hammered in the point that the Guardians just really take their freaking time on everything that they do. It always takes them just so much time because they're bickering or they're talking about something else. And then he's like, does anyone have tape? He's like, I'm going to tape over this button. Because he's like telling Groot, not this button. Yeah. And every time Groot's like, I am Groot. It's Quill, like, flying around, and he's like, hey, do you have any tape? And Drax is like, do you Scotch tape? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, no. He's like, why would you ask about Scotch tape if you don't even have Scotch tape? Like, you can hear him out there, like, still shooting, and he's like getting hit around. He's like, ow.
And then it becomes that thing of like, okay, obviously they've set up so drastically that there's no way he's going to hit the right button, which means he's definitely going to hit the right button when it counts.
And he really thinks about it. He does when it comes to it. He thinks about it. Yeah. At the climax of the fighting, right? Because everybody slowly starts to get out and they blow up all the other ships. Nebula saves Gamora.
Aww.
I know. As Gamora's plummeting. My heart. Everybody's just trying to get out. And then you kind of slowly start to realize that Peter might not make it out.
Yondu saves him, basically. They go fly out. And this is a repeat of the scene from the first movie when Quill goes to save Gamora when she's stuck in space. And he only has enough gear for, like, the one of them. And this time it's Yondu doing it. But Yondu's father was not a Celestial. So how'd you feel about this scene?
Well, it's really sad because Peter gets into this mode of, like, realizing why having eternity, even though he might have, like, this ancient ancestry and he might have been shown whatever he saw, right? It's like he gets these flashbacks in that moment of why what he's doing is important to him. And it is his family. Mm-hmm. That, even though what he was searching for this whole time, it is true. Like, it was right next to him the whole time. It makes Yondu dying, like, really painful. Yeah. Because that is his dad. And that's the person that was taking care of him, though it, wasn't always perfect. And that's kind of what Yondu tells him. Like, it wasn't perfect, but I am your dad. And he did love him, so it makes it painful.
And I think it's the power as well of like the realizing it after it's too late. I think you can feel the washing over his face of like, I wish I understood this when you were alive and we could like have that relationship that way. Yeah, it's that like, oh, now that you're dying, I kind of realize what was really going on this whole time. And like, you know, like that's that worst feeling. It's, you know, Andy from The Office saying like, I wish that, you know, you could know that you were in the good old days while you were still in them. You know, that kind of feeling. And so, yeah, this whole ending is like super like weirdly heartbreaking for the normal tone of these films.
Right.
Bringing you into the basically having the funeral scene. Yeah. And all of the Ravagers come back now and like accept
and celebrate him. Yeah.
That is just, it's so beautiful and it's just so kind of just, you know, it's very powerful.
Because then his death really reconnects all of them back together.
That too. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Which I think is the one of the end credit scenes.
All right, cool. So that, I think, pretty much wraps up the movie.
Yeah. Did anyone have any questions?
So Community. So, Mad Mardigan says, the Guardian ship, the Milano, gets its name from Alyssa Milano, whom, I love that, whom Peter Quill had a childhood crush on prior to his abduction from Earth, which of course fits right in with his part-time obsession with many 80s pop culture's icons, like Kevin Bacon, David Hasselhoff, etc. Are you familiar with Alyssa Milano?
No.
Did you ever watch Charmed?
No.
I know everyone's like, oh, I got fun facts for Maple. Here's a bunch of people.
Here's a bunch of people I don't know. I don't know any of these because I just haven't seen like any movies. That is cool. Yeah, it's kind of like these are like little Easter eggs.
Jarin says, I worked for the company that did all the prosthetics for Guardians of the Galaxy 2. If they look slightly different than the first movie, it's because a different company did them from the first movie. Personally, I think the makeup all looks cleaner in the second movie, but I'm very biased. I thought that's super cool.
That's super freaking cool.
Super cool. So I hit him up actually and asked if they'd be down to come chat or whatever about that. You know, behind the scenes-y, like, tell me what your experience and stuff was on that.
That's super cool.
So maybe they'll take us up on that.
Wait, do my makeup.
Yeah, or they'll fly out here.
Let's do. I'm going to start a channel. I'll do my makeup. Transform me into Drax. I'll do a bald cap. Oh.
Hey.
I'm watching Spider-Man.
It's your boy. Okay, great. Well, love you and bye.